Hello and welcome. My name is Amy McNally, and I am the Deputy Director for Public Services at Hennepin County Library. Tonight's program will be a moderated panel discussion of an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States for Young People, adapted by Debbie Reese and Jean Mendoza. There will be time for audience Q&A, and we ask that you submit your questions to our chat moderators in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. Closed captions are also available. Click on the arrow next to the CC icon and select Show Subtitles. At the end of the program, we will share a brief survey and ask that you take a few minutes to complete it. Your responses will help us improve future programs and tell the story of how our programs build community with partners and the public. I'd like to take a moment to share a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. This land and the Dakota people belong together. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Dakota sovereignty and aspire to hold ourselves accountable to the work of reconciliation. The Mary Ann Key Book Club is made possible with funding support from the Friends of the Hennepin County Library. We'd like to thank the library's many Friends donors for making programs like tonight's possible. You can learn more about becoming a friend by clicking the link in the chat. At this time, I'd like to invite Myron Medcalf, Star Tribune columnist, nationally syndicated radio host with ESPN, founder of the Mary Ann Key Book Club, and valued collaborator of Hennepin County Library, to share a few words about the Mary Ann Key Book Club and introduce our moderator and panelists. Welcome, Myron.
Thank you so much, Amy. Mary Ann Key was my great-great-great-grandmother. She was enslaved in a place called Marion County, Alabama. The Chickasaw tribe in the early 1800s had a lot of land that was stolen through manipulation and trickery at the time. Mary Ann Key was a part of a stolen people who was enslaved on stolen land. And I think about this with this book in particular because I am her descendant, representing her bloodline, this community that continues to thrive. And our panelists are also a part of a community that is not just here to talk about what has happened, but what is. We are all still here. And I think that's so important to convey. I want to introduce you first to our moderator tonight. Ramona Kitto Stately is an enrolled member of the Santee Sioux Dakota Nation. She is now project director for the We Are Still Here Minnesota, Creating Action for Narrative Change. Dr. Katrina Phillips, Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, is an assistant professor of history at McAllister College, where she teaches classes on numerous facets of American Indian history and the history of the American West. Marlena Myles is a self-taught Native American, Spirit Lake, Dakota, Mohegan, Muskogee artist located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Sharon M. Day, Ojibwe, is the executive director and a founder of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, formerly known as the Minnesota American Indian AIDS Task Force. And Pearl Walker-Swaney is Lakota, Dakota, and Anishinaabe. Pearl is Eagle Clan and a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, also affiliated with White Earth Nation. She is a yoga instructor, full spectrum birth worker, and crafter. Thank you all for being here.
Hami Takuyepi. Ampetukinde Owasi. Chante Washte Anape Chuzapie. Ramona Kitto Stately, Amakiapie, Damakota. De Dakota ia iup seyu sewi mieye. Isayanti hechia tahawa hie, tkawana shakpe edwati. Hello, my relatives. I am so happy to be here tonight. I wanted to give you an introduction in the Dakota language, which is the language of Minnesota for over 14,000 years. In the past, I have been the director of Indian education for 15 years in the Osseo School District, whose mission is to enhance the cultural identity of the Native child. And within that work, it was very frustrating for me because there was just no knowledge of the true history of our state and the true history of our country. So I got the opportunity to become the project director of We Are Still Here, Minnesota. And it's a relatively new nonprofit, but the mission is to spotlight and make visible the lives and contributions of Native American peoples and their governments in Minnesota today, because we are still here. So we do this by challenging and correcting false narratives, by replacing fiction with facts in K-12 education, and finding solutions for issues impacting the Native American community. And we do this with several Native-led organizations in task forces in the areas of K-12 education, media, pop culture, philanthropy, and governance and policy. So we take we braid all the strengths of Native-led organizations and allies together to do work that we can't really do in one area, like K-12 education. There's a ceiling to really the work you can do. So we braid the strengths of all these organizations together to really help people understand the work and to get the work done. So I've been a part of the Mary Ann Key book club since the first book, which was Cast. And I've enjoyed all of the different conversations. So when I was approached by Myron to be the moderator of this book, Indigenous Peoples History of the United States for young people, I was thrilled. And when I saw the panelists, I was like, yes, because we can have a really great conversation with people from our state, people that we know and see in the community, and also who are in all different facets and areas of expertise. And so I'm very excited about the panelists tonight and about the conversation that we're going to have. So thank you, Myron, for the invitation and for and the Hennepin County Library, and also for being thoughtful about the book choice and the discussions, the panelists, to bring in a great discussion. So that said, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, because I know we're all busy, we all get asked to do a whole lot of things. So besides introducing yourself, I want to ask you to tell me, when you were approached by Hennepin County Library and Myron Medcalf to be a part of this community discussion, what was it that brought you to yes? So we can go ahead and start. I'll start with Dr. Katie Phillips.
So I said, hello, my friends. I am happy to be here today. Thank you to Myron, to everyone who is working behind the scenes to make this such a seamless process and event tonight. And honestly, the first thing I thought when I got the email, and I saw the other potential panelists, and I saw Ramona's name and I saw Myron's name, my first thought was, oh, this email wasn't meant for me. Like, they sent it to me on accident. But it's just really exciting. And actually, in full disclosure, my husband is, does a lot with basketball and sports and things like that. And so when I said I was asked to be part of a book club that Myron Medcalf is putting on, my husband got super excited, and because it's so cool, right? To have someone like Myron, who is so involved in so many different aspects of this, of these communities. And, just like my fellow panelists, who I'm really humbled to be able to speak with today, that was kind of my first reaction, was that it's a really phenomenal opportunity to talk with some really incredible folks doing amazing work in our communities here, and then also to have the chance to talk about a really phenomenal book.
Thank you, Katie. Sharon?
Excuse me. Good evening. Nagamo Maingin and Dishnaka, Zwabashation, Dodem, Jaboy Koy and Down, Dishnejo Medeo, So in English, I said, greetings, my relatives. And my name is Singing Wolf, and I'm from the Martin clan. And I'm a Ojibwe woman, second degree Medewan, and also one of the head water women. I agreed. First, I want to know who the other panelists were. And then I agreed to do it because I work with young people, not as much as I'd like to, but we have about 3 youth programs at the Indigenous Peoples Task Force. And so I really enjoy being around the young people because, they keep me going, and they're very critical thinkers. And so I learn as much from them as I try to teach them. And I believe like it really helps me and the organization stay relevant in today's world. We were at the MCTC a couple of weeks ago, and the youth were doing a play called In My Shoes. And this piece is about identity, bullying, suicide prevention, and missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And it was written by a young, one of our former staff people, Peyton Counts, and directed by Curtis Kirby. Anyhow, there's about 12 kids in this piece. And after they performed the piece, a woman who was a former instructor at MCTC asked a question of the youth, and that was, what could she do to help educate people in the community? And so Nalia, who's 16 years old and been working with her for a few years, said, if you see an Indigenous performance, buy a ticket. If you see an Indigenous book, read it. If you have the opportunity to purchase some Indigenous music, buy it. She said, because otherwise you are only getting half of the story. And that's all everybody has had up to this point, is half of the story. And I think that's what was so important about this book, is that it clearly articulates that young people in schools, people in this country have only ever had half of the story. And I thought it was amazing. And I asked her afterwards, I said, Nalia, did that just pop into your mind, that response? And she said, no, I've been waiting for somebody to ask that question forever. Thank you.
I love that. Marlena?
Hello, everyone. I'm Marlena Myles from Spirit Lake, Dakota. I live in St. Paul. I'm a visual artist. A lot of the work I create teaches people about the Dakota history of this place that, we call Minnesota, we call Twin Cities. Especially, it's important for me to create art here in the Twin Cities, because growing up, I didn't see anything really that showed that this is Dakota homelands. I didn't see a lot of public art outside of the native neighborhood that I lived in, which is called Little Earth. And then I went to a native magnet school, which is called Four Winds. And outside of that, I didn't see anything else that said, this is the home of Dakota people. And so as an adult, I want to use my gifts to create art that educates people and teaches people things that I didn't learn growing up because the public schools didn't teach it. Like, we went on a field trip, I think it was like 3rd or 4th grade, went to Fort Snelling, and it taught it to us. It was pioneer days. Nobody told us this 99% Native classroom, that this is where Dakota people were exiled from Minnesota. It was an internment camp, a concentration camp. And, I feel like that was like an insult to our history to just ignore it, maybe because it was too difficult to talk about, but there's ways that, we all learn about the Holocaust. Why can't we learn about these things? So, I thought, I enjoy educating people and learning things myself. So anything I learn, I always share it with other people, share research I make with people. And so the art that I create, it has that knowledge and education in it to share it with other people as well. Like the Dakota land map I created, that's in a lot of different schools and libraries and museums. It's even in different Starbucks and stuff. So, it's interesting to me how many organizations want to do like a land acknowledgement and also have artwork that teaches people things they didn't learn in school. And, the land is important to learn from. I think it's our teacher and always has been as Native people, and humanity's kind of gotten away from that in this Western society. It's why we have climate change. It's why we have polluted soils and water and air, and Native people, we're always standing up for these things and trying to teach other people, this is our grandmother, this is our relative, and we need to treat her better. So I hope like the art I create opens people's eyes to forming a better relationship to the earth. And, I feel like the book, it's really important for the same reason. Like it would improve the knowledge for young people now that I didn't have growing up. It would, teach people to have a better relationship with Native people, create opportunities for us to have our space again, as well as learning how to treat the earth in a way so it's not a resource, but a relative. So, to me, it's just felt like it was a good fit for the work I do already. And then seeing everybody else involved, I was pretty excited, especially seeing all these strong, positive Native women, in the society doing their own thing to pass on their knowledge to the next generations as well. So really happy to be here, and I'm happy, I was asked to do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Marlena. And last but not least, Pearl.
Bonjour and no inamagamag skanskawin indigenous cause magazine and do them panaking and debandagos go up again go cog gasaswaji mekag and don't jabab michikamag and diane nongom de quain and downy migrate train them on my eyes go. Hello my relatives, my name is Pearl. I am Eagle Clan and from Standing Rock and White Earth Nation, but today I'm calling in and from Bemidji, and that is where my home is right now. It's where I mostly grew up. And I too had the same reaction when I was receiving the email from the library about this, that Dr. Katie Phillips shared. I was like, are you sure? I think I might have responded, are you sure you want me to be here? But Allison, my dear friend I've known for a very long time, reached out and said, are you interested in this? And you would be great. And so I wanted to honor what she saw in me. And, I have the book, but I never read the version for young people. And when I saw the cover, it just brought me back to when I was in college and when I was in school and growing up, and how I didn't have the words to describe what was going on. I didn't know what microaggressions were. I didn't know what genocide meant. I didn't know about the word termination. All of these things that happened to my people and my ancestors and our Indigenous people. I didn't have the words to describe even those things happening in the classroom among my peers, and the things they would say to me, or teachers, what they would say to me. It was kind of ridiculous, looking back at that. And how amazing it is today that young people and educators and parents and, so many people now have access to, books written by Indigenous scholars, Indigenous writers that tell our stories, and that other half of the history that we don't get in school, and we don't get, unless we take classes in college. Like myself, I didn't learn a lot of the details and the strategies that were used against my people until I was in college, early 20s, and processing all of that. So as a birth worker, and that's my kind of my main role today, as a birth worker, a lot of the education I share with families, and that knowledge starts in the home, how we understand relationships to each other, ourselves, how to be good humans and good relatives. That's something we learn in the home. And that self-education, I think, is really important when it comes to, how you carry yourself and what decisions you make for your family, for the future. So those, all combined were things that made me say, yes, I think maybe I do belong in this conversation, and can share a perspective from the work that I do. And I'm just really honored to be here. I saw the other panelists and was doubting myself. I'm like, oh, are you sure? But I know that I just have a different perspective that maybe people don't really hear about a lot. So just happy to be here.
Thank you, Pearl. Well, you absolutely belong in this conversation. In fact, all of us do. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that we all come from these different areas and areas of expertise. But we're really, at the end of the day, we're really all working toward acknowledgement and healing, So yeah, I hear you when, Katie, when you say, you heard Myron was offering the book club discussion. And I think it's really one of the important lessons about today is that our allies have really strong voices. And so Myron realized that he had a voice and he was able to become an ally to other oppressed groups. And so I feel like that's really important. And the Hennepin County Library, you have an outreach to this community, and you're using it for us to be able to be here tonight to use that voice. So I really, we're just really grateful for that. And yes, we've grown up knowing half the story, and we need to know all of the story. And our purpose in education really is critical thinkers, raising a critical thinker. That means gathering all the information there is and making a decision based on all of the information. So when we don't have all the information, we're not making good decisions. And one example that I can say is in 160 years of decision making in our state, with half of the information or part of the information, we've poisoned every river and lake in the entire state. And Pearl, you can probably speak to this. If you're a pregnant woman in our state, you're told not to eat walleye because of the mercury content. So we have to have all of the information. And so, yeah, there were some really good responses there that just made me think of those things. So in what ways does invisibility of Indigenous history and ways of knowing affect the work that you do? So I want to start that question with Sharon. In what ways does the invisibility of Indigenous history and ways of knowing affect the work that you do?
Gosh, so I think so many ways. I was at the Capitol this afternoon to talk about this Clyde Belcourt Urban Indigenous Legacy Initiative. And that is a bill that would provide bonding and some cash bonding for 16 Indigenous organizations in St. Paul and Minneapolis. And many of the organizations, I don't know if any of you have been at the Indian Center when it's been raining, but there are buckets all over to catch the rain coming down. And Migizi, lost their building during the George Floyd uprising. And we, in Indigenous Peoples Task Force, we for many years were on Franklin Avenue in that brick building with the red trim around it. And, it used to be American Indian Business Development Corporation. And then it became Franklin Business Development Corporation. And then they sold the building to a Somali businessman. And he wanted our space. And so we had to move. And then, so we moved over on Lake Street and we paid a lot more rent. And then there was a recession in 2008. So we moved into the community center for our housing residents. And so it's a beautiful building. It's 8-sided, has a fireplace on the first floor. And on the second floor, it's open, because the chimney goes up to the ceiling. And so we have 21 or 22 adult staff. And if somebody's on the phone, on that second level, the sound just travels from upstairs, from downstairs to the second, it's really pretty impossible. And and while the building isn't old, it doesn't house us. And the new building will really give us, a theater, clinical space. It's going to be so beautiful. But we always have to educate, especially those people who make the laws. Because, line 3, perfect example of that. And I think the book spells that out so clearly, time and time again, how these negotiations over land, over resources were made with other governments. And they, as the Louisiana Purchase, they negotiated that with France as though there was nobody there, and it just, goes on and on. And so I think just always having to educate people because they weren't taught this in school. And so, so many of the laws, the way they're written are, it's all from a colonist point of view. And I would even say even our own tribal governments, they're formed under the 1934 Reorganization Act. So rather than following a traditional form of government where, and among the Ojibwe, our leadership came from the clan system. And so my clan, Wabasheshi, we were the ones who protected the people. And there are other clans had other responsibilities. But when you were born, you knew who you were and what you were supposed to do with your life, right? And in this way, when the United States government imposed, this elected form of government on us, every 2 years, somebody has to run for office. And so there's rarely time for long range planning because you're so busy running for election again. Our governments were trying to revise the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Constitution. And so some of us are advocating for that. The Constitution right now says 3 things governs the land that's held in trust, voting, and enrollment. Those are the only 3 things that it covers. There's no mention of the land that birthed us, the waterways, the protection of those things. And so it's not only do we have to educate, white folks and those government systems, where in a nonprofit like mine, where we have to get our funding from, we also have to educate like our own tribal governments. So any way you look at it, as artists, and Marlena can probably speak to this, but as an Indian artist, I have to, if I want to enter a juried art show, I have to show my tribal ID. but a white person down the road can take one of our designs or one, and they can sell it and they don't have to do anything. And so, so many ways we're just invisible time and time and time again. And, listening to these younger women speak about, learning things in college, like you always hope that, like I'm 2 generations ahead of some of you, like you hope that those coming behind us, that it would have changed a little bit. But I know my granddaughter was in 1st grade and the teacher said, and they were all like grade school kids, Thanksgiving, right? We're going to be pilgrims. And my granddaughter said, not me. And the teacher said, we're all going to be pilgrims. You're going to be, no. Paige, you come up to the front of the class and you tell everybody why you're not going to be a pilgrim. And she said, because I'm an Indian. And the whole class started laughing. And so she was like 6 years old. She said, Grandma, I'm never going to tell anybody I'm Indian again. And this stuff still's happening today, and that's what invisibility, hurts us in so many ways. I'll stop there.
And we all continue to have those stories, Sharon. I'm sorry about that. But that's really, if we don't continue or change the way we educate people, it remains on the shoulders of those wakaheja, those sacred little ones in the classroom. So let's hear from you, Katie. In what ways does the invisibility of Indigenous history and ways of knowing affect the work that you do?
So I am a college professor at a liberal arts college here in the Twin Cities, and not a single student who comes into my classroom has to take any of my classes, right? Nobody has to take any of my classes in order to graduate with a degree. I actually put that sentence in my, my big document I had to write for tenure, and then I stopped and thought about whether or not I really wanted to put it in there, but I kept it in there, right? Because it's really crucial. And that work day in and day out in my classrooms, I am pushing back against that notion of invisibility, that notion of erasure. And the students who come into my class, they might be there because it fulfills like a couple of requirements here or there. Some of them, come in because they know that they don't know things. And that's why they want to be there. And as I keep going, in my career, I hear from more and more and more students who are like, I cannot believe I didn't know this before. How could I grow up in Minnesota, in Georgia, in California, and not know this, right? I have a couple students, again, from California who went on field trips to the missions. I have students from Minnesota who maybe had a brief mention of the Dakota War. I have students from Wisconsin, which is my home state, who have never heard of the Walleye Wars, right, in the 1980s and the 1990s. And again, like Marlena mentioned, like Pearl mentioned, so much of this isn't anything I knew before. It's come out of my education, both as an undergrad and as a grad student. And as I keep going through this work, as I keep working not only in academia, but also working out more kind of as a public historian, the other facet that comes up, and this is really deeply tied to what Sharon said about her granddaughter, where my husband and I have 2 kids. They are in kindergarten and 3rd grade right now. And I so badly want them to have a better education than the one I had. And so I was asked to write a kid's book about Indigenous Peoples Day. And I was so grateful for that opportunity and the way the publisher, I don't want to say I push the boundaries a little bit, but the book talks about the Taino, right? They talk about the people that Columbus enslaved, and talking about how people celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day and why we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And I wait until like the end of September, beginning of October, and then I email my son's teachers and I'm like, okay, this is what I do. We're coming up on Indigenous Peoples Day and Native American Heritage Month. Do you mind if I send some books in with my kids? If you have some downtime or need some books to read. And I have yet to have a teacher say no. And on Indigenous Peoples Day this last year, I tried to play it really cool when I picked my kids up from school. They hopped in the car and I said, "Oh, so how was your day?" And my third grader was so excited. He was like, "Mom, my teacher read the book you wrote, and I got to talk about how cool it is, to be Native, to be Ojibwe and stuff like that." And then our little one, who's in kindergarten, and I will tell this story until the day I die, but he was like, "Yeah, my teacher read the book you wrote about," and then there was a long pause, and he goes, "the kind of people that we are," because he couldn't remember how to say Indigenous because he's 5. And it was so great. And it's, yes, it was just 2 classrooms in our district out here, but those are things that I know I can do, right? Send books to their teachers, ask their librarians, their media specialists, "Hey, do you have these books? If not, can I make a donation of these books to the library?" And it's becoming, like I said, it's becoming a bigger part of the work I do. And it's not one that I really thought about until I had kids start in the public school system, and to think about what it meant to be a brown kid in a school where I was one of like maybe 3 kids who wasn't white. And that's where so much of that desire comes from, is wanting to make things better for my own children, but then also giving my students the tools to go out and share that knowledge, right? I'll tell my students, there is only so much I can do as one person. This information that I am giving you, this is a tool for you as well. And so that's the work I try to do to push back against those ideas of invisibility and erasure.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, we think about how long, how many generations of parents have been doing the same thing. We keep continually trying to make sure that all the information is included in the classrooms. And in 2010, there was some legislation passed that says that all teachers must teach Dakota and Ojibwe in all disciplines. And every year, as we review state standards, we align to those standards, including Ojibwe and Dakota. But what didn't happen in that legislation was teachers weren't given the tools to follow that law. And so, although it's required in their licensure, there's no accountability at all to doing that. So we kind of are still where we were before, which is like Groundhog Day for parents, is trying to help educate teachers. How about you, Marlena?
Where do I begin? Where do I begin? As like an artist, a public artist, I see Native people being erased all the time. Monuments, public art put on our sacred sites that talk forever about the glaciers forming the Mississippi. Then they'll talk about Europeans arriving, and then the rich person who donated money to build this monument. And then at the very end, there'll be one tiny little sentence that said, oh yeah, Dakota people use this sacred site to gather medicines. And that's it. You know, glaciers get more of a story than Native people. Even the Capitol building, you go in there, there's all these murals that honor or share it from the white perspective, and Native people are seen as savages and uncivilized. Like there's even a mural called The Discoverers and Civilizers led to the source of the Mississippi. And it shows like Ojibwe people with their spirit, that Manitou, at the headwaters of the Mississippi, surrounded by like these white European discoverers and civilizers who are guided by angels to show that, you know, God led them to this land to civilize it, you know. And how are we supposed to pass laws, and how are like the, you know, the people who we elect, how are they supposed to respect Native history if that's the art that surrounds them? How am I supposed to go to the Capitol building and then like look at this impressive architecture, but see this kind of stuff still there to this day? And when are they ever going to update this stuff to show Native people, but also newer immigrants like the Somali and Hmong communities, as well as the Latino people? Like, where is everybody else in these stories? So, you know, I see Native people being erased through public art all the time. And I think, you know, it starts in school, and we learn about like the Louisiana Purchase. We learn about how Russia sold Alaska to the United States. Like Native people, you know, no reason to ask them about selling their land or even ask them how they felt about it. So, you know, that starts there. And what Sharon was talking about, how like I have to show that I'm Native when selling my art as a Native person, you know, I respect that, because there's a lot of people who do profit off of false identities and claiming to be Native and stealing our community art and telling our stories and making a profit off it. And there's federal laws, there's state laws, there's tribal laws to protect this. And a lot of times you'll get organizations who choose to ignore tribal sovereignty just because they want to have that artist in their gallery. So they'll ignore these laws that are there meant to protect our culture, just because they want to benefit from it. And as like a Native person, I will talk to these galleries. Some of them are even Native run, and they rather have people who can't prove they're Native in any sense be in their shows just because that person would be pretty famous, you know. And so they're giving opportunities away to people who are using a false identity rather than empower Native people who have, you know, the genetic memories of all these different events in us to tell these stories or to create this art. And like tribes are passing laws now, like Standing Rock, that copyright our knowledge and our culture, our art, our language, because you could even get researchers, scholars that come to our reservation, they'll interview elders, and then any sort of stuff they take, they copyright it in their own name and put it in their own white institution library, taking it away from the Native people. And even languages are copyrighted by libraries that are not Native people. So there's a lot of ways that Native people, our rights and our access to our own art, or even being seen, you know, it all happens because of people wanting to take our knowledge or just refusing to show us in these public places. Like you can go to the Mall of America, they have a mural that says Minnesota, and they have like Paul Bunyan in it, they have Prince, they have like a loon or something, but there's literally no Native person on this thing. And, you know, they could put a buffalo on there, but like behind me, you know, there's actual real Native people on my mural. You know, I'm not a buffalo, I'm not an eagle, I'm not a loon, like I'm a human being. So put a Native person on this art if you want to show Native people. But all the time I see it, you know, anytime I see a mural made by like a white person about Minnesota, you won't see a Native person on it. You'll see, they'll like literally be painting the word Minnesota, Dakota, and it never occurs to them that like, what word is this? What does this mean? Like, it just never occurs to them. So as a public artist, you know, I see it all the time, and I work to, you know, change the narrative and ask people like, where's Native people in this, just to get them to think about us, because they literally just never crosses their mind to think about Native people.
Marlena, there's like 10 things in there that you said that I just want to really expand on, but I'm going to just choose a couple. So one is, what are the monuments? And in the way that this really shows in our real world today, in our ignorance about history, is when we saw the response to the Columbus statue come down. I mean, and not ours, because Facebook was really celebrating on the native Facebook. We were just, yes. But people just really didn't understand why that happened and why that was a good thing. And so we have these myths and stereotypes in our own communities and in our own schools that celebrate Columbus when he never actually ever stepped foot on the continental United States. And the history of Columbus is as a murderer and a rapist. And we don't tell that story, but it serves a purpose because it makes the larger society feel like, you know, first of all, that someone else discovered this vast, beautiful place, our homelands, and it was untouched, and the people who lived here were uncivilized. But then it also makes people think that all of this history happened in 1492, and it really serves a good purpose. So there's a pushback on us really revealing that. But what happened in Minnesota happened within the last 160 years. And that is also a part of this big secret about history. And so this book really reveals a lot of the stereotypes that make us believe certain things and helps us to open up and see this history in a different way. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to go to Pearl.
I had to take a breath after that one. You know, what came up for me when I was hearing, you know, people share and thinking about this question, there's a few things that really just come up to the top for me as a birth worker. I do independent work, but I also work with a lot of organizations and nonprofits or collectives. And so the way we get support to do a lot of the services we offer is through funding. And so that is going to funders and writing narratives about why we need the funding. And oftentimes, instead of being asset-based, the narratives are deficit-based, looking at all of the poor health outcomes of infant mortality and the poor birth outcomes and all of the disparities that we see in our communities, rather than, you know, how this will support building up our assets that we do have. And so it's really harmful when we have to write, you know, those constantly, those narratives, just to get funding to do something that's good for our people and in healing. And so something though that we've looked at is who we're getting funding from. You know, do they align with our values? Do they see us? And do they really support us in our work? Do they care? And that's been really, I think, motivating and uplifting, that there's more funders out there and there's opportunities to really work with, especially like Native-led funders that understand what we're doing as birth workers. So, you know, there's that. And there's also this other part of being an educator and working with families and, you know, reclaiming practices, reclaiming knowledge around birth, around pregnancy and postpartum care that were stripped away from our people in very harsh and horrific ways, you know, that still live in us. And I think birth work is healing work. When we teach families, you know, some of the pregnancy protocols that keep you healthy, keep a womb healthy, and keep a family healthy, they are very intentional and, you know, very connected to our culture, what we value, the land, and our spirituality. And all of those things are so beautiful. And it's really heartbreaking to think that those life ways were split so, you know, so violently by colonizers, by warfare and boarding schools, and what happened to our most sacred beings, our children. You know, their lives, I think Sharon mentioned, like, when you're born, you know your purpose and your gift and what you're meant to do in life, how that was taken away from our young people, our children, our next generation. And so for birth work, it's also this piece of, you know, remembering, you know, educating so that our people can remember those things and practice them. And by doing that, they're setting themselves up for parenting in a way that's very much Indigenous, that's very respectful, and, you know, setting the stage for that critical thinking, setting the stage for our young people to really know who they are. So it's, you know, it's empowering to see that over time, that shift, because of the knowledge that as a birth worker, I get to share with families. And I don't know a lot, I don't know everything, but I do share what I know. And we have a group, we meet like twice a month, and we share collective knowledge so that it's not just one person sharing, you know, birth knowledge or lactation, that sort of a thing. It's a group share, community. And I think, you know, it's kind of counteracting a lot of the ways we've had to push against systems that make birth really hard. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done in birthing centers, in hospitals and clinics, where our people have to go away from home to birth, or you know, go drive hours to have a birth. And I've also seen a movement of birthing people do home births because of how they've been treated in birthing centers, and would prefer that. And, you know, they're healthy, there's no complications, that sort of a thing. But there's, I think, again, a spectrum of the care that we put into pregnant bodies, and the care we put into their labor and delivery, bringing a baby earthside, and understanding all of that as a ceremony, and that they are so sacred. We have to respect that. And that's something we do have to educate the providers on, you know, that we don't need to talk to them in harsh ways. We are here to support this beautiful being and the journey that this sacred being is making. So, you know, it's also educating not just our people, but providers that might not understand, like, why we are slowing things down or why we need to do certain things. And, you know, I also have seen, as a parent, I'm on a lot of boards. I sit on a few boards, but one of them is a school board. And the reason I wanted to be a part of that, not just as a birth worker, but my son goes to that school, and I too wanted him, like that's been mentioned here, a better experience for him in school. And I think this is such a wonderful model that they have. It's a public charter school, and I just was on their board meeting today, and something that one of the board members said, there's 2 natives, including myself, but the rest of them are white women. And one of them said, you know, I really would like to see some more Native educators here, because there's a lot of white ladies here making decisions, and we need this to be representative of our community and the students here. And that was really amazing to hear, that these educators are like, we need to take a step back and let Native people be here in the classrooms teaching our students. And there's a lot of students that are Native and a lot of students that are non-Native, and they all get culture class on Northern Minnesota culture and history. And it's very inclusive of a lot of Anishinaabe culture, as there's a lot of Anishinaabe, big Anishinaabe community up here in Bemidji. And so it's really amazing to see that unfold, because I know it's not like that everywhere in Minnesota. But, all of those pieces, I think, are showing that the invisibility narrative is starting to shift. It's starting to break apart. And it's really inspiring to kind of be a part of that in a way, by being on this board and having my son go to this school and having access to our community and culture in ways that I didn't have growing up. And so, I really do believe that this book does a really good job of posing those questions about how you can take practical action, no matter like what you do. I really noticed that throughout the book. And so, those were the thoughts I had about this question about invisibility and our ways of knowing.
Thank you so much. So I kind of, and I don't know if it's because of the position of we are still here in Minnesota, but I have seen a shift in that invisibility. And I think it takes organizations, well, first of all, thank you for being a school board member, because I think that's one of the ways we can really amplify our voice and be a part of those decision makers. But also, as far as the shift, like I feel like being in K-12, I've always fought a system, and it depends on the leadership, whether you get in or out, whether there's windows of opportunities or there's not. There's a lot of Groundhog Day moments, which is like, you have to start all over again when leadership changes to educate this new group to try and get something done. So I am seeing a shift as I'm looking at a broader group, and I'm seeing that there are organizations that are willing to step forward, just like Hennepin County Library, and people who have a strong voice are stepping forward. And I think it's really important to take notice of who is it that is shifting, and who is willing to be humble enough to say, you know what, we don't know, so we just, are going to learn. We make mistakes. We fix them, because change takes mistakes. But I think one of the questions that I continue to have, and I don't even know when it's time to really like focus on this, but who are those large organizations that are holding us back? Who's responsible for keeping a 160-year-old narrative? Who are they, and why do they continue to put barriers in places so that we continue to have to fight? Because it seems to me that some of the challenges we have, clean water, we're thinking about, we Minnesotans, all of us today, are responsible for the headwaters of the Mississippi. We're responsible for the clean water, which really should be a basic human right. But we let things happen that we know are poisoning the water, and we don't stand for things that are helping to clean up the water and the air. So just a question that I'm always considering is, I love the momentum of narrative change, but also, what's the purpose for those who are creating the barriers? So I'm going to ask you guys one more question, because I know we're almost to the end. And that one question is, what do you hope that what's one thing that you hope readers take away from this book? And we'll start with Sharon.
I especially like the last chapter. about Standing Rock and about the water, because, you know, that's been such a big part of my life these last 20 years. And there was you know, there was a description by somebody who talked about it, and he said, it is as if American history is being played out in miniature. On one side, the terrible legacy of the genocidal Indian wars of manifest destiny, atrocity, and slaughter. On the other side, the great American tradition of equality, egalitarianism, the Bill of Rights, democracy, the fight for human rights. The collision course of history couldn't be clearer than it is at Standing Rock. Mm. And, you know, so, you know, so what I would like, what was the question?
What's the one thing you hope readers take away from this?
I hope readers
book?
take away is, of course, knowledge, but also, you know, where we are in the world right now. You know, this this war that's happening, and there's always a war someplace. And yesterday, you know, in the United States Senate, you know, one person made a difference, and that was continuing that idea that women and for that matter, people of color, that we have no sovereignty over our own bodies. And so I guess that's a democracy, you know, one person rule. That is not how we did things, where discussion until there was a consensus.
Yes.
And so that's the, you know, so I guess, you know, in a word, I was thinking about, you know, like growing up in the 60s and, you know, protesting against the war in Vietnam, and then feminism, and then coming out as a lesbian, and then, you know, and this last thing, you know, and then AIDS, being an AIDS activist, and now, you know, taking people to walk along the river where, you know, like it's about love, you know, like that's what I want people to take away, is that somehow, like, for us, like, what's the most important thing is, you know, where does the spirit live? The spirit lives in love. And I would like people to get to this idea of that we are all human beings, and men have been in power far too long. You know, in our societies, you know, we're more matrilineal. You know, women decided where the crops went, how things got divided up. And, you know, gosh, if I know our societies weren't perfect, but we had societies that were grounded in love, generosity, kindness, to be humble, to be honest, to take care of each other. And that is something. And if people could just learn a little bit about us, these are our values. These are the values that came from the earth, that we still live today. Everything would be so much better. That's what I want people to take away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So for the rest of you, I'm going to ask you the same question before we let the people in the chat ask questions. Marlena, what do you hope that readers take away from this book?
I mentioned it in the article that Myron Medcalf wrote for the Star Tribune yesterday. You can check it out, but I believe, you know, we all have the ability to have an impact. So think about where you work, the organizations you volunteer with. How can you bring Native people into this space? How can you share Native perspective? You know, there's all kinds of ways you can make spaces more available to Native people. Like I worked at museums that, like the Russian Art Museum, they brought me in to create art that teaches about Alaskan Natives interactions with the Russians, like how many times are they able to bring a Native person in, but they went and applied for the grant, they made it happen. I worked at MIA as a fellow when they had the Heart of Our People exhibition. They made it so that Native people could all come and visit the paid exhibition for free. And so anytime I'm working with organizations that are not Native and don't have a lot of Native people attending, I'm like, how can we make this accessible to Native people? Can it be free? Things like that. So think about your own organizations and what you can do to bring Native people back into these spaces and make it welcoming.
Thank you, Marlena. How about you, Katie?
Trying to think of what else I can add to what's already been said. And I think it's hard to have to go like later on with one of these questions because everybody has such fabulous ideas. I think it's a testament to the power of education. I mean, hearing about what all of us have learned and how we are using our education and, just kind of, in a sense, putting out a call to people who have read the book and, to be like, is there someone in your life that you can pass this book on to say, hey, I read this great book, you should check it out, and then hand them the book. Or in conversations, if you're able to buy books and donate books and just be a force for good, be a force for bringing these voices, these stories, these histories, these narratives to the forefront, right? So that hopefully, down the line, if we have another conversation like this, that's what we can talk about. Right? Because we've all experienced that invisibility, that erasure, those moments like Sharon's granddaughter, right? We've all had those moments, those microaggressions, those, I guess, macroaggressions, just straight up aggression. But just working together to build that knowledge, to make it so then that way when, I just hope that by the time my kids end up in college classrooms, that what they're learning about Native history is so far beyond what I teach right now. And that what I teach now is the baseline in high school, in middle school, in elementary school. And that way we can take that knowledge and just move it so much farther beyond where we are right now.
Thank you, Katie. Pearl?
I agree. It's hard to go after others have shared. I'm trying to think of what I can add to, because I think what's been shared are suggestions I was thinking of and wrote them down. But the other thing that comes up for me, and what I hope readers get from this book, is uplifting our narrative and understanding our story. That, so when things like line 3 and the conversations about no DAPL or no uranium mining or tar sands, or what's going on right now with Roe versus Wade, and how that affects tribal communities, that we've been for so long, we haven't been respected in what we value, whether that's by treaty or negotiations or resolutions. And so understanding our narrative and our story, I hope that readers can understand why we are kind of frustrated that we are still having to protect our waters, and our right to just have clean water or clean air, our right to have healthy ecosystems, our right to body sovereignty today. And we will still be here doing that because we value that, and that's deeply a part of who we are. So I hope that people can take that away from reading this book, that we're not just coming out of nowhere with these, ways of protecting water, our rights to, the land we're on, and sustenance or body sovereignty. It's something that has been a part of our people for generations. And we are also here for all people to have that as well. It's not just for our own people, but we are the most impacted by it. And there's practical ways I think people can do that. There's suggestions throughout the book. Those gray boxes highlight ways you can do that. Some suggestions have already been shared of ways to do that. Include Native and Indigenous people in the conversation, bring them to the table, invite them to speak, and compensate them, because a lot of that requires emotional labor. It requires having to educate, and that can be really hard on our spirit and our mind and emotions. And so compensate people when you bring them to the table, because we've got, blood memory and lots of knowledge within our bodies. And so when we show up, we bring our ancestors with us. So that's what I hope people can get from reading this book.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna bring Myron back, and he's gonna ask a couple of questions that we got from the chat, from the people listening.
Well, first off, this has been an amazing conversation. I've just learned so much, and wow, very, very impactful. Before I get to some of the questions from the Q&A, we don't have a lot of time, so I guess I would just ask that our responses are like under a minute, somewhat brief, just so we can get to as many as possible. Pearl mentioned something that I was thinking about, and that's the emotional toll. Books like this in our book club are important because they offer history and perspective, but there's also that emotional toll that Pearl talked about. I think about Mary Ann Key, and I wonder if she would ever think that her great-great-great-grandson would still be wounded, would still be healing like we all are. So that said, what's the hope? Like, where do you find that hope, and what is it to you? So I'd like all the panelists, if they wouldn't mind answering that question. Ramona, you want to start?
Yeah, I do. My hope comes from, it wasn't until 1978 that we were allowed to speak our language and practice our cultural lifeways. All of those things were oppressed by boarding schools and all those things. So my hope is that we remember, like Pearl said, and that's like putting back together those things that were disconnected purposefully from, and our ways banned and that, but we're revitalizing language and remembering who we are, putting those things back together, because for people, and also connecting to place. So all of those things help us to survive and resist colonization, because we really want to be, of course we live in this modern world, but we want to live in the way that our spirit remembers, so we're as healthy as we can be.
Pearl?
I appreciate going a little sooner. For me, I find the first thing that came up was community. Being in community, that's where I feel like birthwork really just lights my spirit up, because we are building community. We're often not doing it alone. And there's just so much beauty, I think, when we have community. And there's so much hope in that, for the future of our people. And also looking at my son and how he is seeing the world right now as a 6-year-old. Was me and my husband talk about this a lot, that he is so far ahead of where we were when we were 6 years old. And so that gives me hope that there is that light that is continuing to grow, and that they're on his generation, I think too, is just on a different wavelength than than we were at that age. And it's really hopeful and inspirational to see that unfold.
Sharon?
I think the hope is with the young people today, the youth that I work with who are actors and musicians, and they're telling this story in an authentic way. You know, when we do theater, we don't do it the way the Guthrie would want us to do it. We do it the way we want to do it. Tell our stories in our authentic way. And my grandchildren too are Ojibwe, Black, and Mexica. And they honor every single one of those identities. Because used to be a long time ago, you know, if you were a kid, if you were a woman and you married into the Black community, or you're Black and you married into the Native community, you got subsumed within that community. It was almost like divorced from that other part of you. And that's not the case anymore. You know, I see kids being very fluid in their identity. And I think that's, you know, I think that's a good thing. They are all of who they are. And that's the same thing with also, you know, and those of us who are queer, you know, embracing that. That's the hope.
Marlena?
I see a lot of hope in people being creative, connecting with nature and children, of course. A lot of work I create is for children. And I think to educate adults and stuff and make them more open to learning about these narratives they didn't learn as young people themselves is through their kids. So kids will be excited about this stuff and their parents will see their kids' excitement. And, you know, I think they'll be more open to learning these sort of stories that they were taught. So those are things that give me hope when I'm creating this work.
Awesome. Katie?
I see hope in my sons and in my students. You know, like Pearl, when you're talking about your 6-year-old, I feel the same way about my boys. They are on a whole other wavelength. I was nowhere near where my boys are when I was 5 and 8 and anything like that. And, you know, I said at the beginning that none of the students who end up in my classes have to be there, but I am always so grateful and humbled that they are willing to show up and to learn these histories, not only, you know, the wars and the battles and the massacres, but that creativity and resistance and resilience, and to see Native nations and Native peoples as not just surviving, but as thriving communities with, you know, with so much of this history and this present, but also of the future. And so I think that's where I find the hope in all of this work.
I love all of that. I want to make sure we're getting some of these questions in the queue. There is someone who talked about, Katie Tuma says, how do we get rid of the books that teach the wrong history in libraries, even little libraries and schools, etc.? I see them and glance through them and see the erasure, but they still exist and they're giving wrong information. How should this be addressed? Katie, would you like to start with that?
Is it bad? My first thought was going to be talk to the people at the library or wherever you find these books. But I know that's tricky because, you know, it's been a long time since I've like walked through a Barnes and Noble, but every time I do and I find like the one little section on Native history, and I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't know if I'd like, this isn't a book I'd buy for myself. But yeah, I think if it's, you know, I know libraries do a lot of great work on that front. It's, I mean, obviously when you think about collections at like Hennepin County, St. Paul Public Library, things like that, it is a massive undertaking. But I know, you know, folks like Allison, who Pearl had mentioned earlier, you know, there are folks within the library system who are doing really incredible work to help get the kinds of books we want our kids to read and see and engage with into the library. So.
Marlena?
I know the library probably doesn't want to hear this, but I would just take the books and put them in a recycling bin and then donate the Indigenous Peoples History for young people to the library instead, or put it in its place. But that's just me.
Sharon?
Well, I don't know what I would do about that, but I do want to share this. This is a book. I don't know if you can see it. No. Great.
A little blurry.
Yeah, I don't know how to make it unblurry, but this is called Nibi Gizage Go Water We Love You. And it was written by Indigenous Women's Water Sisterhood. And I did a series of interviews with I thought it was just a young college student. Anyhow, they created this book and it's free to schools. And I think they just rolled it out a couple weeks ago. So it's really great, beautiful artwork.
Pearl?
I'm with Marlena on this one. I think, you know, it's good. I think I want to point out the person that asked the question, you're already aware that those are like outdated and not very representative. So that's, I think, a really good actionable thing, that you're already aware of that. And now you're thinking, how can I think more about authentic representation of books that I'm looking at or reading? And you have, you know, now understood that this whole discussion was on one of those books, an Indigenous Peoples History of the US. And that's, you know, one that you can share and replace that one with, and make sure all the people in your circles know about it.
Finally, Ramona?
I say, you know, we talked about how important it is to educate teachers. The most important person in that school district is the media specialist. They need to be trained. They need to know, because they can actually exchange books that are out of date and take them out off the shelves without us having to, you know, light a fire. But they can do it. And those are the ones, could be our strongest allies if they got educated properly. Media specialists, librarians.
Awesome. We're running low on time, so we'll have to be brief, maybe 30 seconds for these answers. It's just been such an important conversation. Incredible. And I hope the people who are in the Q&A, who have questions that don't get answered, that you remember the faces you see, and hopefully you can reach out to these people, to our panelists individually. But I thought this was really interesting. And I want to respond to Nicole Cavender. She says, I'm 3/16. So my mom grew up on the reservation in Upper Sioux community and never knew her paternal white parentage. Do any of you have advice for white presenting Indigenous people who are for finding peace between the white and Indigenous histories that are at odds within? I'm passionately interested in my Dakota heritage, yet only this year did I feel permission to embrace being Dakota. Katie, I'll start with you. How do you respond to that question?
So with a question like that, I think what's the biggest piece of that, right, is thinking about what it is you want to learn, what you want to, what is bringing you to these questions. I mean, our two boys and I, we are 3 different shades of brown. And, you know, one of them is, you know, tends to take more after his father's color, and the other tends to take more after mine. And that doesn't make the little one any less Native, doesn't make him any less Ojibwe. And, you know, I think for those among us who are, you know, who do have a little bit of that privilege when it comes to white passing and things like that, is finding a way where you can use that advantage while also learning more about yourself and your heritage.
Marlena?
Yeah, I have friends who are white presenting natives, and you know, they do a lot of activism. So if the police show up, they're the ones who talk to the police, you know, so they don't get attacked by the police. So I mean, there's ways you could use your privilege to help the Native community. You should also just acknowledge that, you know, you have a different privilege than like a brown person would have. And people who are maybe saying, you know, you shouldn't be learning your culture, you shouldn't be connecting to the Dakota people, you might have to understand too that they're coming from like maybe a place of trauma of themselves, of having their own culture taken away from them. So now that they have the freedom, I guess, to connect to it more too, they just are more hesitant to be open, because they know, you know, people come in and take our knowledge and write books, copyright it, you know, people just take advantage. But you know, I just say keep trying, don't give up on, you know, connecting to your Dakota culture, but also to just recognize what privileges and powers you have that can, you know, help our communities.
Sharon?
Well, I just say, like, embrace who you are in terms of your identity. Find an elder to learn some stories from, learn your identity, and yeah, I mean, you have to love yourself, all of who you are, all of your identity, and probably that's the biggest problem in this country is like those first immigrants have no clue who they are. And if they knew who they were, they wouldn't be oppressing other people. So find out who you are.
Pearl?
I would say to add, be in community, be involved in the community, and you'll find your people that will open up for you, like those elders or those people you can learn from. And, you know, just remembering that you do have something that is a privilege today, and there's ways you can use that to benefit your community, your you know, being Dakota. And I wanted to share something that I used to work for a nonprofit, and we'd get leaders come through and do presentations. And this elder from Cochiti Pueblo, Regis Picos, Uncle Regis, if you're watching this, miigwech, he would say, you know, that piece of trauma that we have in our communities regarding identity, you know, when people want to go back to their community and their people, but are seen as outsiders. What he said was so profound, and it has stuck with me. He says, how dare we treat someone of our own people, of our own community, in a way that we make them feel like an outsider? How dare we do that to them? So, you know, kind of like what Marlena said and Sharon said, and what's been said, like, love all parts of yourself. And also, you know, just be aware that you do have a privilege, and it's going to take time, but it sounds like you're already moving towards where you need to be.
And finally, Ramona.
Yep, and I said,
for the night.
so I want to tell you, Nicole, your Kunshi, Naomi Cavender, named me, gave me my spirit name. And she was best friends with my grandmother. And they moved to Minneapolis from Santee. So I sent you a private message and gave you my email. Just send me an email and let's meet, because I got some direction for you.
Awesome. Well, this has been incredible. I guess I'm supposed to say like some final words or something like that. The panel's been great. I'm so humbled to have a distinguished panelist like this, to Katie, to Marlena, to Sharon, to Pearl, to Ramona. I really am honored that you all would take the time to participate in this, that you would, you know, walk through this book with the rest of us, and that we would all learn so much together. My goal with this book club is that it's not something where we just show up, you know, when there's a panel or there's an author event, but that this is a continuous learning experience. So thank everyone for tuning in. Thank everyone for participating in this event. I'm really humbled and honored, and hopefully you'll join us in the fall when we announce our next book. But sincerely, thank you to everyone involved.
And a shout out to Debbie Reese, because I hear she's here tonight.
Debbie's here. Amazing. Hey, Debbie, if you are here, you are awesome. And I'm just so honored to be a part of this. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.